announcements. Sorry, I got excited with the so John Turner's asked for prayers for psoriasis, and actually I can do these announcements afterwards, so I'll do them after. So we're going to get going. So we're going to focus today on one of the main questions that the world throws at God himself. Does he even exist? And of course, if the world can undermine that particular belief, then everything else is kind of worthless. It means nothing. So we're going to go over some of the common attacks. We're also going to cover some mindsets and approaches that are more general that can help prepare you to help people who truly are considering and just don't know the answer. So we're going to start off with a couple quick definitions here that I'm sure we're familiar with. So atheism is the belief that there is no God, whereas agnosticism is the belief that mankind cannot know if there is a God or not. That is something that's unknowable in general. And there are many. Kevin, yes?
I used to identify myself as agnostic. I didn't use that definition. My definition was I never really thought about it, never really considered it.
That actually might be the next one. So Kevin mentioned he had a slightly different definition, which actually is the third one that we're going to cover. So thank you.
Yeah, so these are loan words basically out of the Greek. We've gone over this several times over the years. Ken just mentioned this back on Sabbath. The A, oftentimes in the Greek, is a negative, so no. Theism is from theos, God, no God. There is no God. Agnostic is from the Greek gnosis, knowledge, no knowledge. Gnostic. And we have another word.
Yeah, so both of these in general require at least someone to make a mental decision of God doesn't exist or we can't know. Now there's a third option, and it's more along the lines of apathy. So apathy in general is lack of interest or concern, the word apathy. And so there is a term that's been coined recently, although the idea is not new, of apatheism, which is apathy towards the existence of God, essentially. Meh, what does it matter? It's also, you also hear terms like atheism or agnosticism I've also run across. So what these are, so that's what Kevin was describing essentially. Well, I don't know, and I don't really care. I don't know, it doesn't matter. Why do I need to know God? And so it's not a new thing. In fact, there's a oftenly quoted quote from a French philosopher back in the 18th century, Denis Diderot, that says it's very important not to mistake poisonous hemlock for parsley. It's important. However, to believe or not believe in God is not important at all. So it doesn't matter. Meh, so what? Believe, don't believe, it doesn't matter. So apatheism. So apatheism isn't a new thing come on the scene, but it is much more common these days than it was 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. It's much more now. People don't even, it's not that they've rejected God's existence or decided, well, it's too much for me to know. They just have decided, I don't care. I'm good. I got everything I need. Life is good. I don't care. So this is much more prevalent. You will discover if you get out there and go to like the local coffee shops, for example, and start talking to people, that a lot of people are just like, meh, I don't really care. It doesn't matter. If you ask them something like, well, do you believe in God at all? Who's got time for that? So
that's exactly what it is.
Yes.
Because it's all the shiny things in this world that got people distracted.
Yes. Yep.
Weapons of mass distraction. They've got them from thinking about life and God.
Some realize that if they truly looked into this and considered it, that they think, well, there probably is a God. And if so, then I got to stop doing some stuff I don't want to stop doing. Some have mindset of, that's going to take a lot of time to research and dig into that. And I just don't want to do that. I'm happy. I'm good. I got other stuff to do. But you can, in asking questions to people, if they're open, you can find these things out, and then you can maybe find a way to help them. So another example from Scripture of apology or apologia, or making a defense for God's existence in this case here. So Psalm 19 verses 1 through 6 says here, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. So these are evidences. We can look out and we can see evidence. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night shows knowledge. So it talks to us, although it doesn't actually, but it does. It speaks to us. It passes on knowledge, and it shows us knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. It's all over the world. Nobody doesn't hear it. Their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for his son, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoices as a strong man to run a race. His going forth is from the end of heaven, and his circuit unto the ends of it. And there is nothing hid from the heat thereof.
We're going to eventually get into the book of Romans, but this, I believe, is the basis for parts of the book of Romans that Paul's leaning on, especially in Romans chapter 1. He's hitting into this. And you may notice here, Paul actually quotes this in Romans 10 when he says, how will they hear if there's not someone sent? And he goes, don't you know? Their line's gone out, the sound's gone out into all the world. So he quotes this psalm again. And Romans chapter 1, as we'll see, he says there's no excuse for people because the evidence is clearly there.
So we're going to cover three main objections, not in real depth, but the first one that we're going to cover as far as the objection, a way to answer, does God exist, is the fact that everything has a beginning. Okay, so we'll take a look at that.
Well, I think the important point, if you go back on that slide,
Go back.
is the word made.
Yes.
Because not everything has a beginning. Everything made has a beginning. There is one who has no beginning.
Correct.
Because he's not made.
Right.
The creator is uncreated. Okay, what comes first? The chicken or the egg?
Oh,
Why do you say both, Kevin?
because God made the chicken with the egg.
All right. And why would you deduce that? What led you to that conclusion?
Because the scriptures say that the fruit is in the seed.
Yeah. So like when he created the trees, already had the fruit, seed was in it.
Seed in it.
I made the same line of argumentation.
Yep.
Thank you, Kevin. Because people want to argue, what came first, the chicken or the egg? I believe the egg was in the chicken when he created it.
Yes. So he didn't create a little baby chicken that had no eggs. But it was created. It's at one point in time, there was no such thing as a chicken. And at the next point in time, there was a chicken with an egg. So scientists even agree, although now they're trying to make excuses, some of them are, that the universe began at some point in time. Now they argue about when that was, how that was, but even the universe itself, they say began, it came into existence at some time. And that everything in the universe began at some time and had a cause, something created it.
Is there anyone here who hasn't heard the term Big Bang? Anybody? Not heard? So you're familiar with that. And that theory came forth because they believe the universe had a beginning. It wasn't static. It hasn't always been here. There's been points in times when certain philosophers had ideas that the universe is eternal and that it's been here. But we know, and they can test this scientifically to prove that this universe had a beginning.
Everything in the universe that we can test and observe shows that it is getting older. And that at some point in time in the past, it was younger and then younger and younger and younger. Now, how much farther in the past is a different issue, but everything, even human bodies, which we can observe our own selves, that we obviously change over time. But even at a molecular level, even the DNA has telomeres in it that get shorter as we get older. So everything
Get a little nerdy there talking about telomeres.
Yeah. Well, so everything in existence that can be tested shows evidence that it gets older, and at some time in the past it was younger, and at some time in the past it didn't exist at all. There's no exception that science has ever found or can even demonstrate to show that that isn't the case.
So this is a real simple apologetic lesson to learn. It's only three things to remember. It's a cosmological argument. One, everything that begins to exist must have a cause, right? Something can't cause itself, right? If I didn't exist, I can't cause anything else to exist. There has to be a first cause. And this is a known law of science, the law of first cause. Remember that as well. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe had a cause. Right? Everything that exists, everything that begins to exist must have a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe had a cause.
And so a question to someone, and people hold that belief because they've never really thought about it, that, oh, well, they never really thought about, well, when did it all start? How did if it was a big bang, what started that? So a question, as we've talked about before, questions could be, well, so how did you come to that conclusion? And not for argument. If people want to argue, then that's not. But there are some people that truly, they bought the PR campaign and they believe it. They have really clever graphics that demonstrate all this stuff, and now they just.
So like today, generally when people speak scientifically, they'll say, what was the cause of the universe? And generally in the term you'll hear, like one of my atheist friends, he says the singularity. What's the singularity to them is that little dot that swirled and eventually blew up in the Big Bang concept. So what caused the singularity? What caused that? It wasn't eternal. And where did the space come from where it sat and exploded? All these questions to bring people back, there has to be a first cause. And that first cause in and of itself has to be uncaused, outside of time, immaterial, to create the material in time, in space, in all these things.
We got one more slide on this particular topic, just another kind of a logical argument. Again, remember, argument doesn't mean it's a heated argument, just means a discussion over evidence and facts.
So this is a little bit more filled in argument from what we just saw, the cosmological. Cosmological is a simple three-step. Everything that begins to exist has to have a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Simple three steps to remember. This is breaking it down into 7. The universe exists. The universe cannot be infinitely old, because if it were, it would have entered into the state of entropy long ago. Again, using science. Science, by the way, is not in conflict with faith. We all have the same evidence. The issue between the secularist, atheist, and the theist is the interpretation of that evidence. Right? Atheists can't find God for the same reason criminals can't find cops. Right? The universe cannot be infinitely old, because if it were, it would have entered into the state of entropy long ago. Entropy is the second law of thermodynamics, which states that all things are moving towards chaos and unusable energy. In other words, everything is running down. 3, the universe is not in a state of non-usable energy, therefore it's not infinitely old. If the universe were infinitely old, the universe would have run out of usable energy long ago. 4, since the universe is not infinitely old, it had a beginning. 5, the universe could not have brought itself into existence. That would be in the realm, Alana, of the unreasonable belief idea. Belief number 1, the universe brought itself into existence. It's impossible for something that doesn't exist to make itself exist. Right? Something before the universe and greater than the universe had to bring the universe into existence. That something, by definition, was necessarily supernatural, existing outside of the laws of physics and nature. That something is God, who is by definition supernatural, all-powerful, infinite, and eternal. So it's a wordier version of the previous cosmological argument, but it adds in a little bit of things like using second law of thermodynamics, entropy, further scientific facts.
The second law of thermodynamics also involves randomness.
Yeah.
So you can see random state, which is not what God did, that's where it can get.
Kevin Pettigrew is getting nerdier.
He's trying to get
He's
nerdy.
talking about the second law of thermodynamics in depth. No, but what he said is correct.
Yes.
That the second law of thermodynamics, created by Newton, essentially, shows us that the universe tends to lean towards chaos, not order. That things fall apart; they don't come together.
And that's important as we
Yes.
consider some of the theory, like Big Bang, we'll consider
Yeah, we'll
that.
get that. And Alana, to your question again, too, I had a little note here to address that right here. So appreciate that. Alana asked yesterday if we were going to address some of these points from the three different belief points of view: the unreasonable belief, the blind, and then the evidential belief. So I would say, in general, as a core principle for all of those, is ask a couple questions to find out where do they fall. So some people may have unreasonable belief out of this and say, no, I know that the universe, just the Big Bang was real and it just came out of nothing. Some people might be like, well, I believe the Big Bang, but I never really thought about like the implications of what that is. And then others might say, you know, I studied that and I found out it was wrong. So I would say in general, that's the approach you can take. So once you find out where they're at, then you know what avenue you can pursue further. So the next defense for God's existence that we're going to cover here is intentional design in creation, in nature.
Well, please begin this, I think, a picture speaks 1,000 words, right? That's what they say.
So we got like,
There's a couple thousand words for you here.
yeah, we got several thousand.
Yeah, several thousand words. To consider some of the things that are in creation, and how would this come about accidentally?
Those are flowers, not monkeys.
Yeah, that's not monkeys, that's flowers. That's a flower, not an egret. These are not ducks, those are flowers. And that's not a flower.
Or a leaf. It's a
Or
lizard.
a leaf, that's a lizard. What's the chance? Can you calculate the math on this, Kevin? What's the chance of this coming about naturally without the hand of God? Let me know.
But wait, there's more.
But wait, there's more. This is not a leaf, it's a bug. That's not a leaf, it's a bug. That's not a leaf, that's a bug. And that's a bug.
Creepy looking bug,
But look at it.
yes.
It looks like
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a
Moth.
moth.
It's a moth. The wings, you can barely even see the actual outline of the wings. It looks like a predator or something. And I'm not going near that.
So it's a defense that our Father put on this little creature, so someone might think it's a spider and not attack it.
And going back to the point that Kevin mentioned, that people would claim, oh, well, this was evolution. So all the other moths that didn't have these markings got gobbled up and attacked. But remember, over time, things fall apart and get less ordered. They don't become more ordered. That's just every single experiment that can ever be performed demonstrates that fact. There may be some accidental weird things, but they don't persist. It's just the way that's the way nature is, and any experiments done on it will bear testimony to that.
If things were not created, if there is no design to the universe and the things within, everything's just an accident and it's unguided, just mindless accidents. How would the genetics of this animal ever mimic a tree, a leaf? How would this come about? The geeky numbers are astounding to even consider. I mean, even Kevin can't answer yet.
He's thinking, I can see. We got a few more signs, Kev. We can do it. So. Another slide of pictures here.
Notice the bird. Oh, it's not a bird. It's a flower. See the little babies wrapped up? Oh, that's not baby. It's flowers. Little dancers. Oh, those are flowers. Little skull. Oh, no, that's part of a flower too. Look at the pretty birds. Oh, those are flowers too.
And some of these, the effect of some of these things here aren't to protect from predators, but they're to draw pollinators.
Yeah.
So again, needed. So that's another layer of what purpose is to be performed. So the moth has the spider image as a defense, whereas some of these, they're intended to draw pollinators, bees, and other birds so that they can continue to live.
And I think it's also to tell atheists, hey, here I am. Here's another piece of art.
Yep.
With my signature, with my fingerprints.
So as an example of how complex and how unreasonable thinking that any of these things happened accidentally, and how, take a look at this here.
You want to read the one?
So your phones, I mean, so the phones here, mine's over there, but those phones are way more sophisticated than anything that existed when I was growing up. I mean, way, way more sophisticated. This here says, this is from Frank Turek, one of the apologists. We probably quoted some of his stuff already. If not, we probably will.
Yep.
But there's more code and sophisticated nanomachinery in just one of your 40 trillion cells in your human body than in your smartphone and probably every other gadget you own. If the code and nanomachinery in your smartphone requires intelligence and everything has to work together perfectly for it to work, just drop the thing once wrong and see how bad it goes. Wouldn't the far superior technology inside of you also require intelligence?
Argumentation for intelligent design, that it wasn't just some mindless accident.
Now, could someone just flat out answer, well, no, it doesn't require intelligence? Yes, they could do that. They could even hold that belief, but it is not a reasonable belief. There is no evidence to even suggest that that would be a reasonable belief. So if someone is open, they might be able to hear this.
So again, here these are some astounding numbers. There is more sophisticated nanomachinery in just one of your 40 trillion cells. You have 40 trillion cells in your body, and just one of 40 trillion cells has more technology, more nanotechnology in design than your phone. That's astounding. Once again, science actually provides evidence that God is here. When they come in and they discovered the human genome and mapped the DNA, it's astounding. And then some of these things, the way they operate, the gears within some of this, I'm starting to get geeky now. But yeah, the evidence is there.
Your telomeres are showing.
The evidence is there.
One more example. So this is a technological example, and here's an organic example. One that wasn't not designed by mankind, but is obviously designed.
This is one of my favorite things. But generally, when I'm talking with people on the street and I'm talking with them about evidence for God, I'll point out the human eye and say, okay, your argumentation is that nothing brought this about, is this mindless accident, done all this stuff. Mankind, are you intelligent? Is mankind intelligent? Do we have creative abilities and we can come up with this is creative. This is really creative. And we can make cameras and we can have some great zoom. People want to, I got the new 14, this camera's great, or I got this, Galaxy, the camera's great. But the camera in these things don't even come close to the camera right here. The lens in our eye and its abilities blows away. I mean, you can think of it in your own self. You ever seen like something so beautiful out there? You're like, I want to capture it. And the picture doesn't do it justice. What you caught with your own eye. And so I'll point people, you have unreasonable belief. You want to say it took great intelligence to make this, but this pales in comparison to this that took no intelligence to do. That's unreasonable.
Yes, very unreasonable.
Very unreasonable. The human eye needs about 40 subsystems all working together in harmony with each other. So they all have to appear together at the same time or it would be blind. And they want to say that evolution is just a system of random mutations for the benefit. How would it know to get these 40 subsystems to mutate at the same time in one generation to help have sight? There's just so many arguments. There's so many assumptions and so many bogus assumptions in the realm of evolution that could totally be undone with even just logic to show the stuff's unreasonable.
Now, if someone is obstinate and they want to remain on an unreasonable belief, so this argument, this is not going to help them. It's just going to start a fight. So, but for someone who just really has never considered it, they've heard the narrative, everybody, they were taught it by their parents, they were taught it in school, it's all over social media and TV and movies. So, and the way they present it, it seems to make sense. Especially now, they got all those 3D animations and all that. It just looks convincing. So for someone who just has been overwhelmed with that stuff and never really considered it, this type of information can help open their eyes, no pun intended.
Yeah, this is like one of the things that I might use as a pebble in someone's shoe to start thinking about this. Give them something, I never thought about that before, and now they're going to walk away thinking about it.
Just think, like I took the little cap off the pen, little metal cap. So if 200 years from now, somebody's digging down on the ground and they find this metal cap, they're going to know somebody made this and dropped it they're not going to think it just grew in the ground. They're going to know this was made by somebody. There would be no doubt. They might write great archaeological papers about the society that created such a device, but they would know. And this is not complex at all. This is a really simple thing. It's got some threads in it and the shape and little fins in there. But so if someone's open, then the idea that something as complex as the human eye just happened is completely unreasonable. It is a ludicrous idea. One other thing we're going to cover here, and just in one slide here, is fine-tuning, which is linked to design definitely, but it's its own little variation of it. And I just have one slide here from
The
Mr.
fine-tuning
Wallace,
of the universe.
fine-tuning of the universe. And this just focuses on 4 areas of fine-tuning here on Earth that makes life as we know it possible. So the fact that the Earth has just the right relationship to the sun, that we're the right distance away from it, that the speed that we orbit around it is fit for us, that the angle that our Earth is tilted towards it gives us the seasons so that things oscillate. That's one thing. If any of those things were slightly off, the Earth could not support life as it exists. It couldn't support life at all. And then another one is just the right atmospheric conditions with all the right gases, so that the gravitational force of the Earth keeps the exact right layer and depth of the atmosphere and keeps it at the right density for us with the right mixture of gases so we can breathe and survive. Oxygen itself actually is aggressive. Oxygen will kill you. I mean, we breathe it every day, but oxygen actually is part of why we die. But we need it. So there's just enough so we get what we need, but not too much that it doesn't burn us up. Just the right terrestrial crust he has here. So the right crust thickness and mineral composition to keep the inner portions of the Earth separated from us and still able to work, so we can have the magnetic poles and all those things. And then one other one, just the right moon. So it's the right distance, size, and rotation away from the Earth. And our moon is what they call tidally locked. So one side faces the Earth all the time. So its rotation is equal to its revolution around the Earth.
The timing of it is amazing.
Right, the timing is amazing.
We always see the same side of the moon.
Right.
Even though it's spinning and we're spinning.
Right.
And it's spinning around us.
Yes. Kevin, got the number?
Just the right positioning in the Milky Way so that we can view God's creation.
Yes,
Yes.
that too. Right. Yeah, we're so Kevin mentioned we're just right position in the Milky Way to view, because if we were further towards the core, our view of other galaxies and such would be completely obscured by all the other objects and stuff. So we can see out. So we can see God's creation. Yes,
Psalm
good
19.
point. Yes, Psalm 19. Yes. So these are some of the ways that the question or the attack of does God exist can be presented and discussed for someone that is not unreasonable. So I want to do a quick movie clip here. So Kev, if you could, so 1 second, actually 1 second. So just a quick setup. So this is Jeff Allen. He's a man who was an atheist, a reprobate, definitely by his own testimony, became converted. And so he is recounting part of his testimony of his conversion here. Now don't be offended by his jocularity. He is telling this in the sense of a comedy skit, but he also is telling it from the joyous heart of a man who was freed from his own bondage, and he is in awe of what his creator has done for him, and he just wants to share this. So don't be offended by the jocularity if you might be such, because it certainly, he does not take it unseriously whatsoever.
Bible. And he says, what do you mean? And I says, I'm an atheist. But God knows his own, man, and he knew I wouldn't talk to this man. I was a shallow, vacuous, empty vessel. I really was. And I didn't have anything to talk to this man about until I found out, because of his wealth, he had access to some of the nicest golf courses in America. He was actually a member of Muirfield Village here, and that's all I needed to hear. He was my new best friend. What I didn't know about him was he was a fundamentalist Christian, and I didn't know that. And we're sitting on the fairway one day just talking. And we're talking about life, we're talking about this, we're talking about that, and then he brings up the Bible. And I said, don't give me the Bible, I don't want to hear the Bible. And he says, what do you mean? And I said, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in that garbage. And he says, well, what is it about the Bible you don't think is true? And I said, I don't know, I never read it. And he said, well, you're not an atheist, you're a moron. And I have to tell you, I would have hit him, except that I would have lost access to Muirfield Village. And I wasn't going to do that. And I asked him to explain himself, and he said, well, to be honest with you, a true atheist is not only a biblical scholar, but is scholarly in all the face of the earth. And after a long intellectual journey has come to the conclusion that there's no God of the universe. You, on the other hand, want to circumvent the entire intellectual process and just come to the conclusion that there's no God. That's lazy and moronic.
So I think that's a great testimony. Now, that was a rough time to walk in when you're talking about being a moron. So if you didn't have a context for that, it was. But just to show that depending on the rapport that you have with the person you're talking with and the circumstance, you can be somewhat abrasive in some cases. It's not, you don't always have to be all soft and gentle. You have to be meek and humble, but full of the truth and empowered by the Spirit. I mean, Jesus certainly at times was very forceful. You hypocrites. You know, he was so there are times when that is also proper, but always just make sure it's by the Spirit. Don't be afraid of that if the situation affords such. So sometimes that's, as Jude, as it's talked about, some through fire and some through more kind approaches, but nonetheless.
So the thrust of that, though, was that his Christian friend rightly ascertained, how can you declare you're an atheist? That's an unreasonable belief, because you said you've never even read the Bible. So how can you deny the God of the Bible? And he said you have to thoroughly vet all the religious faiths to be able to stand here and say you have knowledge there's no God. You have no knowledge, therefore you're a moron, is what the argumentation is. It's one of the points. It's actually one of the things I think I picked up from Ray Comfort years ago, is talking with atheists, and I'll use this on the street, talking with people that. And I'll bring them to say, no, you're not an atheist. You're more of an agnostic, because in order to be an atheist, actually, you got to have full knowledge of everything. You got to have knowledge of all evidence that there is that would disprove there's a God. Otherwise, you don't really know what you think you know. And if you actually come to have all this knowledge and know all things, then you're the very God you deny. And you don't want that. So I asked her, what is percentage of all there is to know? How much do you think you have? How much gold there is in China? You'd have to know not only all the gold in the banks, what's gold in the houses, what gold is in a Chinaman's mouth. Can you tell me that? What about everything else there is to know? What's the percentage? You might know what, maybe 2% of all knowledge? So is it possible in the 98% of the things that you don't know, there's evidence for the very God you deny? Right? And that's kind of the point here with Jeff Allen and his Christian friend.
Yes, good. Another approach. So now I want to take a step back and pick up some stuff we talked about yesterday as far as evidence, and dig a little deeper into how to logically, biblically, and correctly analyze evidence and use it to draw conclusions from and help others see if they have an unreasonable belief or if their blind belief is actually wrong and they should change their belief. So, and much of this is from J. Warner Wallace again. We won't. So, and this is actually from this book, and this is not a plug, although I do recommend it, but he goes into much more detail here. And as I'd said before, he was a homicide cold case detective. So a lot of the stuff that that's the framework. He does a great great job of using his life experience to frame arguments and discussions in ways that can be easily understood. And his illustrations are awesome, I think. So he does all the
He's
own
an artist, too,
illustrations
yeah.
too. So yeah. But he is just a man, so always use discernment. So first here, let's take a look. So how to examine evidence. So here is a scenario. So you walk into a room and you see a dead man laying face down. So with this evidence, there's 4 general possibilities. It could have been a natural death, an accidental death, a suicide, or a homicide. And just based on this evidence, you can't really tell much one way or the other. And then some of our home churches have seen this stuff, so we want to share it with everybody. So now let's add a little more evidence in here. Let's say that he's laying face down in a pool of blood. So it's probably not a natural death. There aren't many natural deaths that would cause a big pool of blood to form under you in a short period of time. So more evidence. So essentially, for as far as any reasonable explanation for what's happened here, you can assume it wasn't a natural death. Okay, but it still could be accidental, suicide, or homicide. So now let's add another thing here. The guy's got a knife in the back. Okay, so it probably wasn't accidental since it's in the back. Though it could be, but then it could be suicide. It would be hard to do that, but maybe he set up somehow where he made the knife drop on him or something. So let's just, for reasonable things, let's cross accidental death off. And then one more piece of evidence that we see here is that we see there's multiple stab wounds. So there's probably not going to be suicide. So the only reasonable explanation for what has happened here is murder. Okay, so you see how as evidence accumulates, you can become more and more confident in the conclusion, even though no single piece is like the dead hard evidence, as we talked about, that absolutely proves, are there other possible alternatives? Yes. But as evidence begins to accumulate, you can set aside those less likely ones, and it points you to the most likely explanation for what has happened. And that's true for all evidence. That was true for the evidence we were talking about for God and everything else. Some of it is quite conclusive, I believe, but nonetheless, as the accumulation of evidence can lead you to a fact to where perhaps no single piece of evidence can do that. So that's why it's good to have different trains or chains of evidence or pieces of evidence to be able to demonstrate a point. So we understand, I think. Well, let me stop here for a second and make sure that everybody's following me here to this point, that you understand why, yes, someone could come up with some kind of bizarre alternate theory for this, like the aliens that are on the dark side of the moon have caused this to happen, but there's no reason to believe that. That is not a reasonable belief. Okay, now if somebody had a movie or something that should, but there is no such thing. So just because people can come up with alternate explanations doesn't mean that they're credible or we should even try to prove them wrong. So now let's take a look at this, and let's realize then that if we go back to the first slide here and say, in addition to this, we find an empty pill bottle on the nightstand and the suicide note, and the room was completely locked, even deadbolted on the door, so no one could have been in there and then left. And his wife had said, he's been talking about killing himself for a while. I was afraid this was going to happen. So then we could answer, so we would not have to look any further outside of the room to find out who did this. But with the murder, unless we go into the room and we find the murderer in there, standing over the body, the explanation for this, while we understand it's homicide, the cause of the homicide is somewhere outside of the room. We have to find the person that did this. There's nothing, we can see things in the room that we can understand exactly what happened, but to find out the actual cause of it, we have to look outside the room. Does that make sense? So outside the room versus inside the room. So if all the evidence and such we can look at and we can realize that everything that needs to be explained can be explained by things inside the room, then we don't need to look outside for another, like for aliens on the dark side of the moon. We don't need to look for that. But if a situation here where, okay, we understand clearly what happened, homicide, somebody came in and stabbed this guy multiple times in the back and he fell on the floor and bled to death. But someone who did it, that's going to be outside the room. Does that make sense? So we can look at the same thing in regards to creation and God's existence. So we already did some examples with like the eye. So we believe and we know that could not randomly happen inside the room, inside the universe and all of creation. It didn't just evolve and randomly happen that way. That's not possible. So we know that whatever caused the eye to be designed that way and whatever brought the eye into existence must be outside the room, so to say. So outside of creation, because nothing in creation answers the question of how did this happen. We realize that it did happen. There is an eyeball we can see. So all from inside the room, we can gather that. But the answer to the question, who designed this and who created this, we can't answer inside the room. There's nothing in the room that tells us that. So we have to look outside the room. So if we consider the universe as the natural creation, then those things that would be outside of natural or out of nature would be supernatural, outside of nature. So we would have to look outside of nature. We would have to look to the supernatural to be able to find the cause and the designer of these things. So that is a way to look at evidence, and we're going to go into some more examples here in a minute. But that's another way to take the evidence that exists inside the room, like the eyeball and all the other pictures that we show, and say, okay, it is obvious that this is designed by someone, something, and it also has been created. So who, the answer to who, well, if it's not inside the room, if it's not something natural, then it has to be supernatural, thus God. So let's take a look at some of, and again, we'll go to another picture that he drew in a little bit, but J. Warner Wallace has essentially 7 examples of things that we can see inside the room that would lead us to the question of, well, who did this, who designed this, who created this? And the only answer to those questions would be something outside the room, something supernatural, i.e. God. So I'll just bring that list up here, and then we have a couple more illustrations. So here are the list of the 7. This isn't necessary, or 8. Oh, 8, is it 8? Okay, yes. Thank you for that. Yep. Kevin didn't catch me on my count. So this is not by no means a definitive list. There's other things too. So, and a couple of these we covered. So the universe had a beginning. So if the universe could not bring itself into existence, then that means something outside of the universe had to. So something supernatural.
Something outside the room.
The universe appears to be fine-tuned, and there is no way to explain that fine-tuning within the universe. So something outside the universe, outside the room, must have done the fine-tuning. So life originated from non-life. Because at some point, if you go back, there was no life, and now there is life. So it originated, and there is nothing in the known universe or inside the room that can provide an answer of how did that happen or who did that.
How did life begin?
How did life begin? Yes. And then the design, biological organisms display attributes of design. There are actually some non-biological ones also, but mainly, the eyeball and all, beings, all the little pictures that we showed there all show attributes of design. Again, we got to go outside the room to find out how that happened. There's nothing inside the room that gives any valid explanation. Evil and injustice persist. Yeah, that one might take a little deeper to dig into, but the fact that we even know what evil is or injustice, that we have a sense of injustice and what's right and what's wrong and what's fair and what's not fair, that there's no explanation inside the room of why we would have that. The animals don't seem to have it. Nothing else in creation seems to have it. They may seem to exhibit little pieces of it per se, but not to the extent that mankind does. We have it in a way that there's nothing else in creation. And so since nothing else in creation has it, we certainly couldn't have gotten it from anything else in creation. So it must have come from outside the room. Here, very linked. So a transcendent objective moral truth exists. So in other words, we all don't like being stolen from or being lied to. or other things. So those are, and that's true across all of human history and all societies. Now, societies might convince themselves to the other thing, just what we read out of, well, we're going to read out of Romans, that, they convince themselves otherwise. It's not, we don't want to do that. But nonetheless, humans possess free agency or free will. Again, that's evidence. You got to look outside the room for that. And then this one here is a big one. So consciousness exists. So consciousness is an amazing thing. The fact that we can even think, and we're, I think, therefore I am, and there's no explanation for that. There's no set of chemicals or goo you could put together and no rays that you can shoot it with to make it become conscious. And yet consciousness exists in the universe. So that must have come from something else. So the next slide is these same 8 things with a paraphrase, a short paraphrase of some of the common secular responses to why these things exist or how they happen. This is not intended to be any kind of a definitive list of their responses either, but just to give an idea. So it's a little small here. So universe had a beginning. The main one is a big bang and then a big crunch, bang, crunch, bang. It depends whether, so that it bangs and then it collapses back down and bangs again. Or maybe it was a multiverse or some other thing. The theories change. Universe appears to be fine-tuned. They say because all the disordered parts disappeared, or maybe it was just chance and a lot of time. Life originated from non-life. They really, so they don't think that's particularly an important thing.
Which is funny in light of the known law of science that life cannot come from non-life.
Right, yes. That's why they're kind of like, so, okay, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to see that one. So, not that there aren't people that have made attempts to answer those questions from their frame. But, biological organisms display attributes of design. Again, chance plus a lot of time. It just happened that way. Big coincidence. Evil and injustice persist. This one's good. So life is tough, cold, uncaring, but at least we'll die soon enough so we don't have to suffer too bad. I mean, it really is if you don't believe that there is a creator, then that's the only attitude you can have towards life. Eat, drink, and
for
feed.
tomorrow we die.
Yep. The transcendent moral objective truth. This is created by our evolved brains and society. So society dictates. So that's why Nazi Germany, it was okay for them because their society said, hey, you can keep the Jews and the Polish and all the other ones. So. And our societies, after we defeated the Germans, said, no, you're wrong. And so we punished them because then we were the boss of what the moral absolute was. So that's their explanation for it, but it's not true. The Germans knew it was wrong, just like we knew it was wrong. Again, humans possess free agency or will. So, and the last one here is consciousness. So this is something that really is, and especially more recently with the whole transhumanism, the way that people are trying to think that we can extend our lives or achieve immortality through technology, is because they think that there's no consciousness isn't really a thing. You're just a sum of your chemical and physical parts and the electrical signals that go back and forth, and that's all it is. There is no such thing as actual consciousness or existence. We're just wet machines, essentially. So these are some of the common responses or attempts to explain these things. And each one of these, if you're just talking with someone and you encounter that they're holding one of these beliefs, you might need to dig in a little deeper, ask some questions. You might need to do some research that might be helpful and say, hey, what about this? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? But that's okay. We don't need to know everything. Certainly not. But these are just to have in mind. These are ideas. Now, another overarching condemnation of the secular approach to these things is that many of these are in conflict with each other. So like, for example, the universe appears fine-tuned, but if you really believe the Big Bang was an explosion, explosions don't fine-tune nothing. Explosions create chaos. So they contradict each other. So many of these poor attempts to explain what we see inside the room actually conflict other explanations. So there's always, and then within each little group, you have other competing, no, this is why this, no, this is why this, this is why this. There's no consensus whatsoever, and it changes over time. So that is another overarching condemnation of the approach of this materialistic explanation of what we find inside the room, inside the universe. The only answer to that is And Einstein was one. So he considered this his greatest failure, from what I've heard. Even though he was divorced several times, but nonetheless. But he spent many of his last years looking for what was called the unified theory, a theory that explained everything. So he found the theory of relativity when he was a young man to great acclaim, and essentially didn't do much after that. And so he was chasing this unified theory to kind of bring everything together. How do you explain how gravity works with this force and that force? He failed, and no one has come up with this. But the idea, Einstein exhibited the idea that in man's heart, we know there's got to be one single answer to all this stuff. I know it. I do too. It's on the next slide. Okay. So here's the illustration actually that Jay Warner did that kind of shows all the stuff inside the room. So the little cloud is the room, the universe. And so these are the 8 things that I had on the list. So these are the things that we observe here and cause us to ask, who made this? Who designed this? Who created this? Why is this way? And the absolute most reasonable answer to that question is something outside of the universe, something outside the room, i.e., that would be God. Now, he used the Michelangelo picture of God there, and he's a cop, so it's like a little bunk shot kind of thing there. But nonetheless, so the idea that God provides one consistent answer to all of these questions. And not only that, but all of these things that we witness inside the room bear testimony of what he describes his character as in his book. So if he truly is who he says he is in this book, with the character that he describes himself as in this book, this is the universe we would expect to see as a result of his acting and creating it. So these are ways to look at evidence and assemble evidence so that you can come to a firm, sound conclusion. Now, this evidence is completely worthless to somebody who wants to be stubborn and obstinate and not listen. But for those who are either in the area of blind belief, and they just really have never considered these things, but are open to consider them and willing to put in some effort, or to those who they think they are in the evidential belief category, but they're open to listen to other evidence, they might be changed. So these are the kind of things we can help. So we only have a couple. I have another little movie clip in a minute, and then a couple more slides, and then we'll be done for this part. But before we go on, so are there any questions or comments on this part about evidence? I really enjoy reading through the way he presents it and such. I think he does a really good job. He has helped me, at least, in kind of frame some of the stuff in my mind that has helped me have discussions with people along these lines without all the confusion of being overwhelmed with, well, I don't know this, I don't know how to answer this, I don't know how to answer that. So, and hopefully this is, and he goes into much more detail in the book here on each of these aspects, and he covers several of the more specific attacks or claims that people who hold a secular materialistic view hold and use, and he shows ways that they can be shown evidentially, well, that's not true. You jump to a conclusion that is incorrect.
Yeah, the inside the room versus the outside of the room, that definitely,
Yes.
as Ron was saying, I know it's one of the things that totally got him hyped. And in short, it's just saying we have all these evidences within the room, within the universe, these things, and they all point to a cause that's outside. And so it has to be something that's immaterial, as he says up here, non-spatial, because universe is space. It has to be someone who's non-spatial, atemporal, meaning he's eternal, non-material, physical, and uncaused. There's an uncaused cause for everything we see in the room, and that all exists outside the room. So as Ron was saying, any questions on that, Alana?
We were just talking about how sometimes you can have this conversation and then they'll ask, well, where did God come from?
That's my next slide.
About how
That's the next
everything
slide,
made
actually.
has a beginning.
Yeah, that's the next slide.
Yes.
So good question. So Alana asked, okay, so if God created all this stuff, then who created God, essentially, is what a question people have. So
That's
Thank
why
you.
I emphasize, as you said, made.
yes.
When Ron had the slide up there, it's like, wait, back up. everything made has a cause.
Excellent segue. Thank you very much. Then we're actually not going to dig into this too deep. There are many resources to look into. And we don't want to overwhelm with stuff. There are quite easy. But in general, if we understand, go back to the other slide here. So if we understand that God is outside of all of this stuff, so he created it. God is not temporal. He's not natural. The fact that everything has to have a beginning is a natural law in the created universe. It does not extend beyond the created. That's the way he made this universe. Everything has to have a beginning. He is above the laws of this universe, obviously, because he's all powerful. He does not have to have a beginning. That's a law that exists inside the room, not outside the room. In the same way,
outside of time, space, and material.
in the same way that the creator of the fine tuner exists outside the room to be able to create the fine tuning, the creator doesn't need that. That's a law that is incorrectly put upon God, just like God doesn't have, he's not within time. That's part of his nature.
Yeah.
So there's some more in-depth stuff you can, but in general, that's the answer to that question, that he doesn't need to be created. And it's not just like a smarmy, evasion, but in reality, it's essentially someone who wants to hold that. I would ask them, why do you think God would need to be created? God created everything. What reason, what evidence do you have that, other than you're saying, well, he created everything, everything has to be created? That's one of the pieces of evidence that God exists. Yes, everything in the natural inside the room has to be created. So thus it has to be created by something or someone that didn't have to be created.
And if something created God, what would that be?
Right.
So that also would have to be the same non-spatial,
Yes.
immaterial, eternal being that they deny exists.
Right.
So their argumentation, it's an unreasonable belief. And that would lead to that question. It'd be the underpinning of that question, then who created God? Because the question is still then being begged, what is the first cause? Because there's the law, the scientific law of cause and effect. Everything has to have a cause, and there must ultimately be a first cause. It doesn't go on for infinity. And so there must be a first cause, and that first cause must be eternal, because it has to be uncaused.
Right. And
So along the lines of the word, keying on the word infinity.
yes.
Mankind has a finite way of thinking.
Yeah.
Our thoughts are not God's thoughts. Right? So he's capable of what we're not.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Kevin said there that so God, we're finite. Humanity is finite. We have limited thoughts. Our thoughts are not God's thoughts. He is infinite, and he is all-knowing, and he is beyond what we can comprehend. And he's the kind of being that can create all of this stuff. I mean, just imagine the power, the imagination, the love to create all this. I mean, the fine-tuning we didn't talk about. So it is fine-tuned, but it's not just fine-tuned so we can meagerly eke out a horrible existence, but it's fine-tuned in a way that we get weather like today, and everything is nice, and the picnic's going to be good. So he's given us many. Brian mentioned this on the first day about God is good. He's given us many gifts. I've heard several people throughout the last few days that we've been here saying, "Oh man, I was hurting, and I went and I sat in the hot tub, and I feel much better." We can enjoy things like that. Even God has made us so we can do that.
This rejoicing heart.
Yes.
You don't have this in here, right?
No, but this might.
Okay.
So I have another video. It's about 3 minutes long. So this is a fella. So hold on one second, Kev, and then we'll go there. So it's a fella named Tim Barnett. He has a channel on YouTube called Red Pen Logic
With Mr. B.
with Mr. B, right? Yes, Red Pen Logic with Mr. B. So he will either actively go out and search for challenges to Christianity, or people will address him either in comments in his videos, or they might send him an email or whatever. And so then he will attempt to address their objection. And so this is one example of where an atheist has try to articulate their objection, and then he is going to counter it. And he has a very good, calm demeanor and it's not, so it's just a video, so it's not them talking back and forth. And so that's the context here. And so in one moment, we will switch over.
Mr. B was a teacher. And so he uses, teachers, you take out your red pen to correct what people are saying. So that's the red pen logic. He's coming in, pointing out their errors and giving correction.
Ready? Yeah.
Why don't you believe in God? This is the question I'm asking.
If believing in a God gives you comfort, so be it. For me, there is not a shred of verifiable proof of the existence of your God or any of the thousands of gods that are claimed to exist. Religion is a holdover from the infancy of humanity that was used to control large groups of people and leveraged to create power. Until the millstone of religion is removed from around the neck of humanity, we will never progress as a species. Because even today, religion and the belief in God or any God is used to create division, hatred, and death. Have a nice day.
The original question is, why don't you believe in God? Let me start by saying I appreciate that this person takes the time to give a response. Let's look at what he says together. First, we're told that there isn't a shred of verifiable proof for God. Now, this response should be a giant red flag. I get that some people aren't persuaded by the evidence for God, but to say there's no evidence, like zero, zilch, nada, is a massive overstatement. For centuries, brilliant men and women have offered arguments for God. For example, God has been argued as the best explanation of the origin of the universe and life, of objective morality and beauty, of miracle claims and personal experience, just to name a few. These aren't nothing. Second, he mentions that some people believe because belief in God brings them comfort. Okay, that's true. But so what? Does this mean that God doesn't exist? Of course not. Notice this focuses on the psychology of the believer rather than the veracity of the belief. Maybe belief in God brings comfort because there's a comforting God who exists. Third, he mentions that religion has been used to control people. Well, that can be true at times. But how does this show that religion isn't true or that God doesn't exist? Well, it doesn't. Again, notice how this focuses on the motivation of the believer rather than the truth of the belief. By the way, when someone disqualifies a belief based on its origin or genesis, they have committed a genetic fallacy. Finally, he says religion needs to be abandoned to progress as a species. This is a little ironic since it was religion, Christianity specifically, that brought us hospitals, universities, human rights, and modern science. I call that progress. Have a nice day.
In the kingdom or in this, there's no supernatural in the universe, and therefore, if there's no supernatural, there should be no miracles. But they don't realize at their core they believe in miracles, because as an atheist, they believe that you can get something from nothing, that nothing can create itself. That's miracles. You talk about having faith. Right? Unreasonable belief, though. Right? They believe in the miracle that you can get something from nothing. They believe in the miracle that you can get life from non-life. Science has scientist, science doesn't do anything, science doesn't speak, but scientists speak, and scientists try experiments, and they've tried to create within. So this is even outside their realm. Even if they perform this in a lab, that's still intelligent design creating that. So this still doesn't prove their concept that no intelligence brought about life. But even in their intelligence, they can't bring about life from non-life. All right, so that's a miracle that atheists believe in, which shouldn't exist if their atheism is true. Order from chaos, as Kevin's talking about with the law of entropy, the second law of thermodynamics. It's chaos. Everything tends to disorder. If their concept is that there's a little swirling dot of singularity and exploded and it brought about order, that is a miracle because it flies in the face of known laws of science or the second law of thermodynamics. Right? So they're believing in a miracle and then getting the immaterial from the physical matter. What's the difference? If you were to scientifically check a human body just prior to death and after death, what is the difference in the two? The difference is the spirit was in someone. There is no scientific measurably difference in the two, but there is immaterial. They're asking that this immaterial came from physical matter,
like consciousness.
Consciousness. It's a miracle. So they believe in 4 miracles, which undoes their own atheism. Right?
So we got a couple closing slides here, some scriptures, and then we'll open up for last questions. So here, Romans 1, verses 18 through 20, as was referred to earlier, we see here the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, which may be known, knowledge. We read in Psalm 19. For God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So this, again, this is not a verse that you would necessarily want to just quote to someone who is contrary to Scripture, but as Christians, we can believe and understand this, and we've just seen a lot of evidence to back this statement up, as if God's word wasn't enough for us. No, it's not just complete blind faith. We believe this, but we also have evidence.
There's evidence, yeah. When people want to say you can't prove God exists, a lot of Christians are even taught within their churches, yeah, we can't prove it. You just got to believe. That's wrong. Romans testifies otherwise. NLT of that says, forever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and the sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, so they have no excuse for not knowing God. The evidence of a creator is shown by the creation. I have never seen, touched, smelled the hands of the men who built this building, to my knowledge. I don't know that they exist, other than I see there's a building, and there therefore must be a builder. Though I have never seen him, touched him, smelled him, whatever, I know a builder exists because the building exists.
Outside this room.
Outside this room. So Acts 14 is another verse, Acts 14, 15 to 17 in there, where he talks about, I'll just get to the last part here, where Paul says he has not left himself without witness. And what? In that he does good, and he gives us rain from heaven and fruitful seasons, filling our hearts with food and gladness. Like I said, these things that God blesses us with are evidence that, one, he exists, and that he is good and blesses his creation. There are witnesses to God here. So it ain't that our belief is unreasonable, or it's not that we don't have evidence. There's evidence all around us, to the point that God says people are without excuse to say that he is here and that he is good.
Yes. So just keep in mind also that while people are without excuse, that they know, we all see, we may choose to reject or ignore, but in the same fashion that David knew that murder or conspiracy to murder and adultery were wrong, it's not like David didn't know that, but he forgot somehow, or he had sequestered that in his mind, and then God, in his love, sent Nathan to open David's mind again so he could see in the mirror, David, you're that man. In the same way, just because people know doesn't mean, and they close their mind to it, doesn't mean then we should just wash our hands. Well, they know, and they're ignoring it. It's the same thing. So I want to close with 2 Timothy 2:24-26 again. And the servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle unto all men, apt to teach, patient in meekness, instructing those that oppose themselves, if God peradventure will give them repentance to the acknowledging of the truth, and that they may recover themselves out of the snare of the devil, who are taken captive by him at his will. So if the church isn't the source of that truth, then what truth are they going to get? They're going to get the truth of the world, which is not going to lead them to life.
Which is not the truth.
It is not the truth. So I see actually there's a lot of activity here. Ken, I think you've been posting some stuff. Appreciate it. To some questions in there. So I don't know if I have time to read through all this. Do you think there's anything, is there anything online, anybody online that has a burning question that Ken hasn't helped answer yet? And again, appreciate it, Ken, very much.
Yeah, that's a plethora of activity.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, I'm just thinking not. So I'll look through the chat log later. So if there's something that I might either create a PDF or something that we can download or address it in one of the other.
Now, we're here all week,
So,
folks.
yes.
We're here all week.
So are there any questions in the room? Any comments, anything else? Again, appreciate the time and the interaction and all the work that you do for your Heavenly Father that brings him glory. And thanks to Kev for suggesting the red pen logic.
Just to remind us of this connecting, we communicated the announcements just so those online can hear the announcements as well. So it's just like the requests.
Yeah, so the announcements, yeah. I don't record them, but they'll be online. All right, then. We end the recording here. We got a couple announcements, and then we'll close with prayer.